Okay, so welcome everybody. Hello, my name is Brianna. I'm the communications manager for the town, and I'm joined today by John Thompson, code enforcement officer for the town of Amherst, also building inspector. I'll have him go into that a little bit more, and community liaison officer Bill Laramee, and your town manager Paul Bockelman. So before we have introductions, I'm going to ask Paul if he has any general updates to share with anyone.
Sure. I just have a couple things. I know this is going to be a rich conversation, so I don't want to take too much time. I'm really pleased that the town council passed the town's budget for FY21 on Monday. So very pleased by their action and that we now have a budget for FY21. And so that's all really good news. I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm sure there'll be lots of things that come up during the course of this conversation.
Yes, I think we've already got a bunch of questions that have been submitted, but I would like to take a few minutes for John and Bill to introduce themselves. Two of my favorite colleagues. We used to work on the same team a couple years ago. So John is on my top left square, so I'll ask him to unmute and go first.
Hi, I'm John Thompson. I work for the town of Amherst as a building inspector, health inspector, and the senior code enforcement officer. So I'm dealing with building code, sanitary code, and zoning bylaws. And my particular focus is rental housing, the health and safety of rental housing in Amherst.
Awesome, thanks, John. And then Bill, if you could take a moment to introduce yourself as well.
Sure, yeah, thanks for having me on. My name is Bill Laramee. I'm a police officer here in town. I've been with the town for 25 years. In the last 5 years, I've taken on the role of neighborhood liaison officer. So what that kind of encompasses is working with members of the town, the university, and then the community to improve relationships. It's mostly centered around students and their impact on our community, both positive and negative. So that's kind of my role in a nutshell. I do work a lot with John and others in town.
Great, thank you. I do see that a couple of new people just joined the room, and I want to remind you that we encourage you to ask your questions live. You can do so by raising your hand in Zoom or pressing *9 from the phone, or if you'd prefer, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and I will read your question aloud. First question I have here is, how does the town work with the university when there are house parties normally or any other large gatherings? How was that done in the past, and how is that going to look differently due to COVID?
So I can start just based upon a police response. We'll take it at its most simplest form. So, you know, we expect, as in years past, to respond to quality of life complaints, and we'll talk about the noise complaints specifically. So, you know, we respond, we identify whomever resides there, and depending upon the outcome, it is shared both with John as well as property managers and landlords, and then ultimately with the university. So we meet weekly with a team from both the university and the town every Monday to kind of discuss, recap the previous week's activities and any events of concern to us in the incoming week. So it's a real fluid system. I mean, the meeting is a formality, but this stuff kind of occurs really every day. We have a real strong relationship with people at the university. And again, it's a system that works well for us. It's really kind of improved year to year. So this year, I don't think it's, obviously there's more concern. You know, everybody's senses are heightened. So, but again, I think the communication is in place. We're just kind of, you know, buttoning up some last minute items, but I think we'll be in a good position to deal with anything that comes up.
John, do you have anything to add to that?
I want to thank Bill for pointing out the team. You know, it's inspections here in town, it's the fire department, it's the police department, and it's the University of Massachusetts. We meet with them weekly. Every 2 weeks, I run a meeting that's attended by all of those inspectors, health inspectors, police department, DPW, where we talk about issues in the town. So we try to, take things right as they come. And I could say that, in the last year, I've worked on 283 violations and complaints at 93 properties in town. And I don't do that alone. I do that with the help of all those other departments.
Can you give an example of how you address it? Like maybe something that's happened in the last couple of weeks about, you talk about individual properties, right? You say,
That's
what are we
right.
gonna do about this?
So I got a complaint about a property on North Pleasant Street, a 2-family house. I did a 2.5-hour video inspection of the place because I didn't want to go inside. Property manager ran the camera, and I compiled 6 pages of handwritten notes during that inspection. I put that in the form of a order to correct, which was sent to the owner of the home. The house was condemned. Since that happened a month ago, the owner has hired a contractor. They're gutting the house. It'll be a total rehab. That's a pretty successful case.
I love that example, John, especially now with technology, how you guys are using technology to do things that you used to have to be very present and oftentimes in people's homes. And are there other ways that you guys are using technology now to do the work that you used to do in person?
It's a lot of Zoom meetings. We all of it happens virtually, and sometimes here in town hall, there's 2 or 3 people on the call. We're sitting a little ways away from each other, but we're interacting on a screen.
I even heard that you bought a Zoom technology piece for Bill to help him get through some of the meetings. So it's truly a team effort.
Yes, at the beginning of the stay home order, I knew that these Zoom meetings were going to be important. So I, signed up and bought my own account and learned how to do it.
And we appreciate that in IT, I have to say. So thank you for your efforts there. So I want to acknowledge a couple comments and a question that came into the room just now. One of them was an update to make to the COVID-19 site from Abigail, which thank you for that. I just did that as we were talking, so you'll see that changed. We also have a comment here. Is it possible if possible, the town should pass an emergency bylaw restricting gatherings of more than X number of individuals? X could be determined using science or health guidelines. That might be more of a Julie Board of Health question, but I don't know if anyone here has any comment on that.
Yeah, Bill, I think it'd be interesting to hear from you in terms of what's the police response when there is a gathering, and do you have a number that you say that's too many, or when the officers are called to respond to a house party of some sort?
So I can speak to the question that was fielded as well as yours, sir. So in terms of response to parties, it's really at just prior to COVID, it was at the discretion of the officers, and I think it remains as such. But I think we're going to see a lot more calls where, if there's 10 or more gathered, we're getting a call about that. So there's this little bit of a complicated intersection between what is public safety and what is public health. So that's why, the question was asked around, is there going to be an emergency ordinance passed? And that's one of the questions I've been asking, because as a police department, I feel like we're in a good prepared place to act upon public safety type stuff or quality of life complaints. But the piece that we feel like may be missing is what capacity can John act? Right now, there's no direction in terms of, can he act monetarily? Is he just going to do some type of education and outreach? So if we can get that, clarification on that piece, I think that is going to help us. And my understanding is there is some discussion in the works around that. So that's good to hear.
I can say a piece about this too. We just this week have done 3 Zoom meetings with properties that had complaints. So there was a police response to each of those properties. We followed up by setting up a Zoom meeting with the occupants of the properties and talking about the event and what our expectations are for them going forward.
And I do have another comment that just came in response to what you guys have said. They say calls are fine, but there must be a new ordinance with graded warning, fines, and subsequently more expensive fines. So that's just a comment to follow up on that. Another question here. I am told the university does not know where its off-campus students live. During the pandemic, would it be helpful for the town to have that information? Much of that population is in rentals.
So this year, go ahead, Bill.
If you look at the community agreement, there's some language in there that specifically says they have to tell them where they're living off campus, which is, it's terrific to hear that news because it's something we've long pushed for. And I think it's going to help with, I think the intention behind it was around contact tracing. But I hope once we move beyond this, that just becomes standard practice for them so we can better identify where their students are living in our community.
And I will say, as far as rentals in the town goes, we have a pretty solid inventory of which homes are rentals, but we don't necessarily have the information of whether they're students or not based on the town side. So while we can determine which properties are rental units, we don't know who's necessarily living inside them right now. Okay, so I want to remind the new folks who have joined us, please put your questions into Q&A, raise your hand in Zoom or *9 from phone. Another question here, what are your main concerns with COVID-19 with the students coming back in the fall?
I can jump in. I have the same concerns that I think most people in town have. I'm nervous about students gathering, in an unsafe way. We've already seen that happening on weekends. They come back and they have parties at their houses and, there's 30 or 40 people there. And it looks dangerous. And as just as a 65-year-old man, I'm afraid to be exposed to that.
Bill, do you have any specific concerns?
Yeah, my concerns are similar to John's. As a parent and a husband and a police officer, and as a town, I think we've worked really hard to be in the place we're at now in terms of public health, and we don't want students coming here and eroding that progress. I have 2 teenagers, so it is a battle at times in terms of perception versus reality. So, it's going to be a challenge, but as John and I have participated in many of these Zoom meetings, they know that the stakes are high, and we've heard from students that they understand the severity of this and they want to cooperate. So it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. So we'll see.
I'll jump in for a minute and say that we've had meetings with fraternity and sorority management ongoing since March about how to reopen. And we've also gone the next layer down. We've met with presidents of fraternities and sororities to try to get that message rippled out.
That's been one of the great things for the town is that we have, inspections, police, fire, everybody in conjunction with the university off-campus housing folks and the community relations people all working together to get the word out and to let it be known that there is a unified approach to ensuring safety. It's really about safety for students, but also the general public. But it's both, and I think that there's been a lot of progress made in the years since the big event that you guys have made, and it's really refreshing to hear you on the front lines and what kind of conversations you're hearing, and then the kinds of response you're hearing back. So it's interesting that they understand the gravity, but you're still wary of if action's going to follow from those statements, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
We have another question in the room. We all know that very often more than 4 unrelated individuals are living in a single house or apartment, which is technically not allowed to have any more than 4 in the town of Amherst due to zoning regulations. So the question is, the town willing to work harder to enforce this bylaw? And what would that look like?
Yes, it is a worry for me as well, because that's one of the bylaws that I enforce. And I'm nervous this year that so many students are coming back to town with no university housing. I think that they'll be, bunking with their buddies. And the way we respond to that is through complaints. Neighbors call and say, look, I see 6 or 8 cars parked at this house. Can you check it out? And we do an investigation, and then we go after the property owner to rectify and comply.
And John, can you talk a little bit about the complaint process, how people in the past have been able to lodge complaints about properties that they have concerns for, both something a neighbor notices going on or a tenant themselves trying to get a problem resolved?
Yes, so I get complaints by telephone. I get them by email. The town has an electronic complaint form on the rental page. I get those every day. Those come in. The way we follow up is we do a little investigation. We sometimes do an inspection if it's needed, and then an order to correct goes out.
And I know you're a numbers guy. Do you have a sense of, in the past, what has been from year to year the largest amount of complaints that you've gotten or enforcements that you've written? Does something stand out to you?
It runs about probably, things that I take action on, runs about 450 to 500 complaints a year.
Okay. All right, so I've got another question here. This person's remembering issues a few years ago with what people are calling Blarney blowout. And they're saying that they haven't heard anything about that since then. Is it still a problem? Are people just not having big parties like that anymore? Or Bill might be best able to speak to what that's all about.
Bill's frozen.
Bill, are you there?
Muted for sure.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. We had some radio chatter. So
no
in terms of the event that happened many years ago, yes, it is still something we are prepared for in March. It is, in the last couple of years, it has essentially been a non-event. And again, that goes back to all this partnership problem that occurs. Really, the work we do throughout the year doesn't change because of this one event. We do our follow-ups, communication at the time March does roll around, or the end of the semester. There's not many people we haven't reached out to and had these discussions with, though. Again, it's something as a department we are prepared for, but lately it's been a non-event.
Okay, thank you. You were breaking up a little bit there. Oh, you're back. I have a question here for, I guess, mostly for John, but how has the quality of rental housing improved over the last couple of years, now that there's a registration program for rentals and dedicated staff to ensuring the health and safety of our neighborhoods?
Well, I think it's obvious if you drive around town. When I started doing this job 8 years ago, people stacked their trash at the side of the road, and it just stayed there. They had cars parked all over their front lawns. The town was a wreck. And just going after these things one at a time, the word gets out. People know now, and most people know the rules, and will call me and complain.
One of the challenges for our town is that we get an influx of new students every fall. And so it's a new education effort that everybody has to engage with. I mean, I think, I've only been here, I haven't been here as long as John has, but there has been a clear improvement in the rental properties and how they've been maintained, at least from that you can see from the streets. And I think that's 100% due to the enforcement actions of the Inspection Services Department. And I just was wondering, John, you don't seem to sleep if you get 450 to 500 complaints a year.
we have, that's just things that I've taken action on. So I might go to one house and, well, like I said about the North Pleasant Street property, I had 6 pages of violations. That's at one house. So that bumps that number up. It's only 93 properties that I've been to, but there's a lot of things wrong there when you get inside. A lot of landlords' attitude is that, well, I'm just going to rent it to students, so there's no point in fixing it up. And what we've found is, yes, if you rent it to them that way, they don't take care of it. If you fix it up and it's nice, they feel that, and they don't tear it up the same way. But it's tough to explain to landlords that you got to put out that kind of cash.
And the other thing that happens is we hear from a lot of parents who drop their students off in the fall saying, this is not a very good place that we just rented. I didn't even know what they rented, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I just wrote a check for $4,000. I can't believe this place.
All right, I got a bunch of questions that just came in from attendees in the room. So the first one that was asked is, what is the schedule for reopening of bars?
So bars are later on in the governor's phased approach, phase 3 approach of the new normal. And I think we will be very careful about opening bars. That's a proven place where viral infections spread. So we will be very slow on reopening bars in this town.
We have another question here going back to the rental property bylaw. Are there any ways to change the rental property bylaw to be able to punish property owners who rent to more occupants than permitted? Or would the property owners just make quick property transfers to change the ownership to avoid sanctions?
When we find those cases of overpopulation, we do enforce them. That's part of what I'm talking about with the complaints and violations that have been successfully abated. It's obvious when you drive by someplace and it's the same 8 cars there every day for 2 weeks, that there's 8 people living there, and that becomes an issue. Part of the bylaw says that I can do an interior inspection within 24 hours. So, that happens. I order people to let me see the place.
And I will add too, it's sometimes news to a property owner if happens to be more people living there. Sometimes it's not. It really depends, and from what I've seen. So I have a comment and a question here from John. Can you all speak to the years of work you've had done through the CCC and off-campus student life, creating positive relationships between students and non-student residents in neighborhoods, and changing the expectation and perception of UMass students? And then there's a second part of that question. Could you address specifically how those open lines of communication and relationship building actually are more effective in an emergency like COVID, rather than fear, hate, and blaming? Really good question. I can repeat that if you guys would like. So I think the first part is talking a little bit about CCC, maybe saying what that is, and the off-campus student life programs that have been happening over the last few years.
Bill, you want to jump in?
Sure, I can. It was a little bit broken, but I can explain to you. The CCC is the Campus Community Coalition to Reduce High-Risk Drinking. So it was started by Sally Lanowski, who is one of the deans at UMass. She's the dean of off-campus student affairs, and she has a background in public health. So started with her and is really kind of evolved into people from the city, people from the community, both in public health, public safety. We have business owners. The DA has a seat, so it's really kind of a discussion around, behaviors that adversely impact communities in and around alcohol. So to give you an example, so I'm a chairperson of a committee that's crime prevention through environmental design. So it's focused around how we can change environments to change behavior. So if you remember many years ago, we would have pretty much every weekend, we would have large gatherings in North Amherst, both on Hobart Lane and at the townhouse apartments. And large meaning thousands of students would gather without warning. So we were unprepared, ill-equipped, and it just got to be a reoccurring theme. So
Oh, I think we lost you, Bill.
I'll just jump in here.
Yeah.
What Bill has done on this with everybody else in the town is actually been recognized through the International Town Gown Association as a model practice that other university and college towns are paying attention to. And the idea is that you design things, you put up fences to inhibit large gatherings, and it doesn't, and so it creates a nicer atmosphere. So small gatherings are okay, but these gigantic gatherings that's sort of where it gets a little more dangerous for everyone, that we've tried to quell a little bit.
Okay, so we lost Bill. I think he might be having some connection issues, but if he pops back in, we'll welcome him. I've got a question here from Steve in the room. Bill and John gave examples of problems being identified through complaints. If the town makes COVID-related rules, for example, numbers of people together, mask wearing, would it also be complaint-driven? Whether complaint-driven or not, would enforcement be by police action or by the inspectors?
You're muted, John.
Sorry about that. Great question. It's a question we have too. We're looking for a little direction from the Board of Health in town about who enforces this. That said, I'm not sure. I think education is the key to this. I'm not sure that this is something we can arrest our way out of. We need a behavioral change, and we need the students that I've talked to seem willing to take leadership roles in this, and that's important. They have to be in charge.
It's a really good point, because on Monday, the Board of Health is meeting to talk about a mask requirement for certain areas of town, primarily the downtown or densely populated areas, which makes perfect sense. And usually the Board of Health identifies its health agents, and a lot of times it's the inspectors, but also it can be the police department. But a little bit later today, we are going to be talking about other ways to focus on education, which is what John's referencing, and what the university has found to be way more successful than punitive measures in terms of folks. Because if people say, hey, you have to wear a mask, most people by far are willing to do that. I've seen it in other communities that I've been to where it's the standard and you look odd not having a mask on. So, and we want to talk about engaging with the university students and other people, non-police officers, to engage folks to say, here's the rules down here. So I ask you to comply with it. Oh, you need a mask. Here's a mask. We've got some masks to give you. You don't have to have one. So we want to do it as a friendly, please come downtown, enjoy, and you can, if you come downtown, you can feel safe because everybody will be abiding by the same rules.
Yeah, and I just want to echo what John said too, involving students or young people or people are concerned about coming back into town, involving them in the process is huge, because good policy isn't created in a vacuum, and you could design something that you think makes sense and then it just doesn't take into account that audience. So I think that's really important that you've taken that perspective, John.
You see Bill in the audience?
Let's get him back in here. Okay, I do see that Steve has his hand raised. So Steve, I'm gonna allow you to come in and ask your question. Just introduce yourself and unmute. You are now in the room.
Okay, am I unmuted? Can you hear?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm Steve George. I actually am on the Board of Health, but I'm really not speaking for the board. I'm just trying to get information. And so, of course, I agree that education is the way. But if the town puts through an ordinance, a law, a rule, it seems like that will be really toothless if it doesn't have the real possibility of enforcement. We could just say, let's please wear a mask. Please don't gather. And I agree with that. We should do that as much as possible. But if there is to be a rule or a law, it seems to me that we should be very clear about what could happen. Maybe it would have to be a flagrant violation, obviously, or something like that. But we should be clear about what is going to happen if people don't do it.
So yeah, I agree with you 100%, Steve. I mean, I think in almost all the Board of Health regulations, there is a fine system that's in place, and sometimes it's a graduated fine. Under the state law, you can go to fine up to $300. So that will be that will be your decision on Monday.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
You know, the tickets that I write are $100 a day.
But do people pay it? Do people actually?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes, we collect quite a bit of money that way. I know that there was a case in Nantucket where on the 4th of July, there was a big party at a rental house, 30, 40 people. The health agent went to break it up and they laughed at him and he wrote a $1,000 ticket. So I don't think you have to write too many $1,000 tickets in town for the word to get out.
Good.
I bet they stopped laughing after they got that bill. So normally we wrap up at 12:30, but I have another question, and I feel like if people have more questions, we can go for a few more minutes if everyone's okay with that.
Sure.
So we have a comment here from Abigail. It's super spreader events like large parties that will see large number of infections. Not wearing a mask while walking on a sidewalk downtown is a lower risk. Any comments about how you're anticipating handling large parties, or just in general about that comment?
Can you hear me, Brianna?
We can hear you, Bill. You're a little choppy still, but.
All right, my family made me get this iPhone 11. I don't know. I'm not convinced that this is the right choice. So, in response, our response is going to continue to be the same in and around large parties. It's enforcement that is likely to change. We have town bylaws for unlawful noise and nuisance houses. So I think you're likely going to see more broad use of that this year. But I think our responses are going to be the same. And we're also, again, working in partnership with John and his team. Even if we're not responding, if we make observations absent a response, if we're going to be taking photographs and doing some type of documentation to give to his office too, so they can conduct some follow-up.
Okay, great. Thank you for filling that in, Bill. So I do not see any more hands in the, oh, actually I take that back. There's one more question. We know how many residents have received COVID-19 diagnoses, but we don't have that information for people who work here but live elsewhere. How can the town monitor this? I don't know if, Paul, if you have anything to say about this.
So the way that the MAVEN, which is the public health system, works is that it reports information by town. The university has its own it's treated almost as its own little town, but there is really terrific communication between our health director and their health people there too. So they share each other the information. If someone is COVID positive, then in our town, we will know about that. If someone happens to work in town but lives someplace else, typically we get notified through a contact tracing, or the health director in that community will contact our community saying you should be aware of this situation. But the fundamental organization tool is by place of residence.
Okay, so I am going to say that I don't see any new questions in the room or hands. I'm going to thank our guests, John Thompson and Bill Laramee, for joining us today and sharing their knowledge with us. Before I officially wrap, is there anything any of you want to, any last words you want to leave people with before we close?
I think we're gonna have to have John and Bill back because they've been so popular. There's lots of questions for them.
This was fun. Thanks for having us.
Now we
Yeah, thank you. On to cooperate.
Thank you. We appreciate having you. Next time we're just going to have to get Bill a new phone, but that's okay. We can do that. Thank you, everybody who's joined us, and for all your great questions. If there's something that you want to follow up on or get more details on, please email us at info@amherstma.gov or call the town manager's office at 413-259-3002. We also have a Cup of Joe tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. with Bid Director Gabrielle Gould and Amherst Area Chamber Director Claudia Pasmani. So please join us for that tomorrow at 8 a.m. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks, Brianna. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.